Hi friends, we at GLC would like to take a quick moment to thank you for watching our programs on this platform, and we'd like to ask you for a little favor. Would you please go beneath this video and click the subscribe button? Did you know that by simply subscribing to the GLC YouTube channel, you can help us financially support the programs on this platform? You'll need to be signed into YouTube beforehand, but if not, simply click the subscribe button and YouTube will automatically walk you through the steps to sign in or to create an account. By taking these simple steps, you will not only ensure that you continue to receive our unique programming and gain instant access to the hundreds of videos we post, but more importantly, you'll also be telling YouTube that GLC's content is worth watching and promoting. Likewise, if you enjoyed a specific program, please click the thumbs up button below, which also helps inform YouTube that this is a program worth recommending. Finally, once you have logged in and subscribed, please click the notification bell below in order to receive announcements when we post new content. As usual, feel free to post your questions and comments in the comments section below. We always love hearing from our friends and viewers. Again, thank you for watching and supporting God's Learning Channel. We couldn't spread the message of the gospel without you. Be blessed, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, shalom. Welcome back to the Wild Branch Ministry and our ongoing series called Paul Putting Words in My Mouth. Now this time we're going to deal with Romans chapter 14, the phrase, the weak in the faith. Because the text there, which I'm about to read here as we read through the verses first, is generally used to show, once again, that all food is the same and all days are the same. And there's nothing, there's the idea of the Sabbath being a special day of the week has been done away with and all those kind of silly conclusions. And so first, before we begin, I want to read through the text. We are in Paul's letter to the Romans, and he's addressing a term called the weak in the faith. And that's how he begins this whole thing. And so I'm going to read through the first few verses right off the bat. Paul says, "Him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth only herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not. And let him not which eateth not judge him that eats, for God hath received him. Who art you that judges another man's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Yes, he shall be held up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteems one day above another, and another esteems every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord. He that regardeth not the day, he regardeth unto the Lord, or he does not regard it. He that eats, eats to the Lord. He that gives God thanks, and he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not and giveth God thanks." Now, that's a rather convoluted, typical King James way of saying something that was very familiar to the people written at the time. So I want to begin by establishing a little bit of the context. Even though I'm only going to go back a few verses in Romans chapter 13, keep in mind that Greek context is generally the verse before and the verse afterwards. That's what we've generally been trained to do, is that, well, let's get the context here, and we read the verse before, and then read the verse afterwards. Hebrew context is the rest of the Bible. It's assumed that you've read all these things before this. And so Paul makes an interesting statement in Romans chapter 13, verses 8 through 10. And here's what he says. He says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another. For he that loves another has fulfilled the law. For this, you shall not commit adultery. You shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet, and if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. Love works no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law." Now, notice the context of what Paul is going to say here, because one of the claims that I've heard all my religious life, is that we don't have to obey the commandments of God anymore. Our commandments are two: to love our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's the only two commandments that we have from Yeshua, which is a total ignorance of the whole culture behind this, of the reason why when Yeshua was asked about which is the greatest of the commandments by his own brethren in the flesh, by the way, who knew the scriptures, he replies with, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So he's already firmly established something very familiar to the Jewish people at that time. And that is the 10 Commandments in particular were a summation of all the commandments. All the commandments were summed up in the 10. And the 10 were divided into the first 4, which were commandments about how to love your God, and the last 6 are commandments about how to love your neighbor as yourself. And so Yeshua is only summing up all the commandments by saying, you shall love the Lord your God and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Otherwise, he would have had to stand there for what? Maybe 4, 5, 6 hours and rattle off all 613 commandments, if there are 613. He would have had to rattle them off. So they have a way of saying that. We have all these kind of things in our culture as well, where we sum up some things simply by one statement. For example, when we want to sum up how everything was accomplished, if someone asks, well, what did you do today? Or what did you do this week? Well, we use the phrases, we ran the gamut from A to Z. Now that keeps us from doing what? Having to stand there and sing that song. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So we simply say A to Z. That's a way of saying, even in our culture, all the letters of the alphabet, all 26 are summed up in those 2. Hebrew is actually really the same way. The Aleph Tav that's used all throughout the scriptures, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, the Alpha and Omega, is a way of concluding all 22 letters of the alphabet is understood in just the 2. Paul's doing the same thing here. And what you also recognize is that he talks about love, and he says that love fills up the Torah. And so if you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself, you have fulfilled the Torah. But then he goes on to say, as almost anticipating what religious systems are going to do with this information. And so what he does is he sums it up by saying, for this. Remember, the context is love fulfilling the law. You don't commit adultery, you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't bear false witness, you don't covet. And if there be any other commandment, they are all comprehended. That word there is to sum something. They're all summed up. Some of your translations may have that. They're all summed up in love your neighbor as yourself. So what he's saying is that rather than rattling off all the commandments that have to do with love. So in other words, how do we know how to love our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength? How do we know how to love our neighbors ourselves? You keep the commandments, because the commandments of God show you how to love one another. Why? He's dad, we're the kids, not the other way around. And so he's constantly teaching us, you want to know how to love your neighbor? Keep all the commandments concerning your neighbor, and that's loving your neighbor. As a matter of fact, that same word is used in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10, that idea of gathering something together or comprehending. In other words, it's all summed up in this. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10 uses that same word when Paul says that in the dispensation of the fullness of times, he might gather together in one all things in Messiah, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, even in him. Now that phrase in English there, gathered together in one, is the same word used as all the commandments are comprehended in this saying. So they're all gathered into one saying. Now with that as the background, now we're going to go to Romans chapter 14, verse 1, because the culture at the time, what they were going through at that particular time, is that all of a sudden, there's this influx of Gentiles coming out of all the religious systems that they had been involved in before they came to know the Messiah. So we have these new believers. Remember, he's writing to the Romans. We have these new believers in the Messiah, and they're trying to deal with these people. And so how do we handle these people? These guys are coming in with all kinds of teachings and all kinds of doctrines and so forth that they had in their previous religious systems. And so how do we deal with those? So Paul uses the phrase in Romans 14, verse 1, him that is weak in the faith receive, but not to doubtful disputations. So automatically the context right off the bat is we have these Gentiles come in, and there's some things that are doubtful. And so when it comes to the weak in the faith, don't turn them away because of doubtful disputations. Now let me first of all say that nowhere in any of the scripture from Genesis to Revelation is the Torah ever called a doubtful disputation. It's never called that. It's pretty clear what the Torah says. And so the Torah covers how we live our life. But there are some things that are not covered in the Torah. And that's going to be the context of everything that Paul is going to do here. And he also uses the phrase weak in the faith. Now that word weak in the Greek is astheneo in the Greek. It primarily comes from the word kala in Hebrew, kala, which means to weaken. It's translated many times as to profane or to pollute something. C-H-A-L-A-H. So one of the words that comes from this is kala. Now it's translated as pollute or to profane something. But actually that word means to weaken something, to cause it to be weak. That's why Paul uses this word. Now there's two ways to make something weak: by adding to it and by taking away from it. Example I always use is a cup of coffee. Remember the Father says, don't add to my words, don't take away from my words. And so there's two ways to weaken a cup of coffee. I can either add water to it, and that will weaken it, or I can remove a lot of the grains out of it when I make the coffee in the first place, and it will be much weaker when I get it. So you can make coffee weak by adding to it, and you make it weak by taking away from it. This is a word that's never used. Also, there's one other word in Hebrew. It's kashal. K-A-S-H-A-L. Kashal is translated primarily as stumble. Now let me first of all stop and say, nowhere from Genesis to Revelation is the commandments of God, any of them, ever called weak or ever called profane or a pollution or stumbling. Nowhere is it ever called this thing. These are words used to describe people. When it comes to the commandments, people stumble. People are weak. It's not talking about the Torah. As a matter of fact, in your New Testament, it's used in Matthew chapter 10, verse 8 to describe sick. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and read some of these. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 8, the same word is used. Matthew 10, verse 8. Here it says, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely you have received, freely give. So that word sick there is the same word used here for the weak in the faith. Now remember, these are Gentiles coming out of the system that they were in. They've just now learned who the Messiah is and that they're redeemed and they're new believers. And they're not strong in walking out these things, this new thing that they've found themselves grafted into. They're not strong in it yet. They're weak, but they're bringing in some things. As we see the context here a little later, they're bringing in some things that are not specifically covered by the Torah. And that's the nature of the culture they were in at the time. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. In John chapter 5, verse 7, it's translated as impotent folk. Impotent. Where has the Torah ever been called sick or impotent? Romans chapter 8, verse 3, it's translated as the weak through the flesh. We need to read that one. Romans 8, verse 3. The same word is used there. It says, you're familiar with these verses. It says, there is now therefore no condemnation to them who walk in Messiah Yeshua, who walk not after the flesh, i.e. the old man that we just discussed in the under the law thing, but after the Spirit. You have His seed in you now, and now you can walk in newness of life, not according to what your flesh wants to do, but what the Spirit wants to do that is in you. For the Torah, or the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua, has made me free from the law of sin and death. From the Torah of sin and death. In other words, the law before is because you don't keep it, because you sin, you die. The Torah is not sin and death. It's because we don't keep the Torah. Because the wages of sin is death. And Paul says we all sin. So we're all once again in the same condition. And so because we sin, we die. And he goes on to say, for what the law could not do, in that it was weak, what? Through the flesh. God sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin condemned sin in the flesh. And so once again, it's weak only because of us. We are always the problem, and it will continue to be that way. Another example, of course, is that Yeshua kept the commandments of God. Was He weak in the flesh? Paul kept the commandments of God. Stephen kept the commandments of God. John kept the commandments of God. All the disciples kept the commandments of God. When you read the book of Acts, when you get your understanding of the church or the assembly in the book of Acts and not from the early church fathers, you'll see that they all kept it. So were all of them weak in the faith because they kept it? No, they were not. Now, Romans chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, after he's talking about receive them. Don't reject them because of these things that are doubtful. There's going to be some things happen, and this happens all the time in every culture. As a matter of fact, there's things that go on in our society now that you see on the news, the predicaments and the strange things that people find themselves involved in. It has to be real life. No one's imagination could dream up these kind of things that are going on in our world right now. That the principles may be in the Torah, but they're not specifically revealed in the Torah. And so he's trying to say, because the Torah does not say yea or nay to whatever it is, don't reject them. Receive them when it comes to these things. Now, two primary things that are going to be happening with these new believers is the laws concerning food and instruction that they had from their previous religions, and the days, particular days, superstitious days that they thought were better than other days, because the Sabbath is never mentioned here. I want to make it very clear. The dietary laws of Scripture and Shabbat are not even mentioned in this chapter. It's not even addressing those issues. It's addressing these things that these Gentiles are bringing in with them in this new walk. And so he says, for one believes that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Now, once again, he may eat all things. All food is what it's referring to, because that was the nature of their religious systems. He's not talking about one believes that he can eat uranium or plutonium or can munch down a rock or something. He's not talking about all things. He's talking about food here. One believes that they can eat meats, because the contrast is vegetables or vegetation. There were vegetarians. They were vegans existing in those days. We're going to talk about that in more detail when we get to 1 Timothy chapter 4 a little later on this series. So these are the kind of baggage that people are drawing in. The Bible doesn't say that there's no Torah command to only eat vegetables or only eat meat. The Torah does not address what kind of food you should eat. It does address whether you should eat unclean things, but that's not the subject here. It's the fact that there were people who believed, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, that meat was evil. Eat was evil because it was flesh. And the gods actually inhabited these things at the time. And so they would not eat meat, because these are the things that were also sacrificed as well. And so they were only vegans. And so he's trying to say the Scripture doesn't say that you have to only eat vegetables and so forth. So that's a doubtful disputation. Don't reject them because of that. If they think that it's only good to eat vegetables or non-meats, then let them do it. If they think they can eat meat and vegetables, then let them do that. Don't despise them, for God has received them. Then he goes on to say, in Romans chapter 14, verse 4, who are you that judges another man's servant? To his own master he stands or falls, yet he shall be held up, for God is able to make him stand. Don't judge that person. The Father's going to do that, because these are doubtful disputations. Romans 14, verse 5, one man esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Now, once again, what's the assumption here? That it's talking about the Sabbath. It's not talking about the Sabbath at all. One of the unique characteristics about the culture at that time in Jerusalem is the various systems, the various religious systems that existed at that time. And I'm going to submit to you that some of you are well aware of the fact that even Judaism, I'm not talking about the Bible, I'm talking the religion, Judaism, also, according to the Talmud and many other extra-biblical writings, esteems one day above another in many of their teachings as well. Some of you well know that there's certain days that are better to marry. Now, this is something that was very familiar to a lot of religious systems at that time, that they were superstitious. That's the word we would use. That Tuesday was a better day to marry, that Thursday was a better day to conceive, or a Sunday was a better day to go to war, and they all esteemed one day to be more important than another day in order to conceive or be married or go to war and so forth. But see, the Scriptures do not teach. The Torah does not say that Tuesday's a better day to marry, and the Torah does not say that Thursday is a better day to conceive. It doesn't address that. And so what Paul's advice concerning these Gentiles coming in is that if they feel that Thursday is a better day to conceive, then let them do it unto the Lord. If they think that all days are okay to conceive a child, then let them do that unto the Lord. And the same with the food. If they think that vegetables is all that they should eat, then let them eat it and let them do it unto the Lord. If they are able to sit down and have the lamb at Passover and have a steak that night, a ribeye or whatever, then let them do it unto the Lord, because the Torah does not teach you that you cannot eat meat. As a matter of fact, when they come off the ark, that becomes quite apparent that it's okay to do it. God has ordained that to happen, by the way, I'll say, after the fall, if you will. So that's why Paul goes on in Romans 14:6, and he says, he that regardeth the day. Now, is there any mention of Sabbath here? Regardeth it unto Yahweh. He that regardeth not the day, whatever day that may, that you think's better than another day, to Yahweh he does not regard it. He that eats, he eateth to Yahweh, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not, to Yahweh he eats not, and he giveth God thanks. Now, what's interesting to me is I think that some people point out that this is speaking of the Sabbath. And now we don't have to observe the Sabbath anymore, because in God's eyes, is what they're trying to say, all days are the same. So Shabbat isn't any more special than any other day. First of all, he's not addressing this issue at all. But the irony to me in all of this is that most of the people that say that to me worship on Sunday. And they revere, even the culture reveres that day above all the others. And so here they are, saying that all days are alike, but yet they turn around and make Sunday to be more important than all the other days of the week. There's a problem there. They say all things, even when it comes to our festivals and so forth, they do the same thing. And so we condemn the teaching of keeping the Shabbat under these verses, but then we turn around and just lift up another day above all the other days. And we can all say to ourselves, well, we really don't consider that day to be any more important than the other days. But the reality is that's not what we see in our life. Our whole culture is designed that way. We close down stores. How many stores do you know in this country, grocery stores or clothing stores or things like that, that shut down on Sunday? How many little towns and big towns do you go into in which things are not open on Sunday? Do you think it's possible that they esteem that day to be above all the other days? Yes, and that was also the condition of many of the religious systems at that time as well. For example, Gnosticism and Zoroastrianism and so forth. These were some of the most well-known religious cultures at the time in the first century. And these guys had a number of beliefs that dealt primarily with the idea that their gods inhabited the animals, particularly the living things. And because of the nature of dualism and so forth, were directly involved in this. So the gods inhabited these things. And so because the gods inhabited them, they would not eat those things. Now you got to remember that what we have in the scriptures here is the people, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, coming out of Babylon. And the reason why the Jeremiah tells us to come out of Babylon, and the reason why we are told by Yeshua that I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, is because the Father already knew that we would be scattered among the nations all over the world. And when we came out of those nations, we find out that we have mixed ourselves with all the other religious systems of the world. The Bible uses the phrase calf worship in Exodus chapter 32 to describe that kind of worship, where we do things like the other gods of the other nations do. And so we mix everything together. So the Father already knows that when His people start coming out of Babylon, they're going to drag all this baggage with them. And some of these things the Torah simply does not address. So Paul's advice is, do not reject these people in your communities. Now there are some things, by the way, that they insisted upon. For example, in Acts chapter 15, when the council meets together, remember Yaakov or James puts the council together to deal with all these influx of Gentiles. that are coming in. See, these things were prophesied, that in the days when Yeshua would rise from the dead, that he would begin to reunite the house of Israel with the house of Judah, and there's going to be multitudes. As a matter of fact, Isaiah says, hey, you need to take the tents and extend the tents out, stakes of the tent, because you're going to have all these multitudes coming in, that those of the unmarried wife are actually going to be more numerous than those of the married wife, Isaiah says. So all these people are going to come in, and they're going to bring all this stuff with them, and all the particularly Gnostic systems that all of them had come out of. And so Paul's admonishing him, don't reject them because of this. But you're also, in order to sit down and have fellowship with them. See, that was the big concern of Acts chapter 15. What do we do about these Gentiles, and how are we going to train them and grow them up in this? Well, they made a decision that there's basically going to be 4 things that we're going to ask the Gentiles to do. Things strangled and so forth, and involved in blood and so forth. Those are all things that have to do with disease. If you read those things carefully, first of all, they're in the heart of the book of Leviticus. These things were already addressed in the first place, but they all have something significantly to do with how disease spreads as well. And so basically they've decided, well, in order for us to have fellowship with the Gentiles in the synagogues, listening to Moses every Shabbat, we need to ask them to abstain from these 4 things. Why? We don't want their diseases. We don't want their things spread out throughout all the rest of us. And so it's no coincidence that they all have something to do with the spreading of bacteria and disease. So I guess he's simply saying that if you have some disease that can spread around, or you doing things that are unclean, we don't want you sitting down at the table with us. So these are the things you don't do. You'll notice that murder is not one of them, if you will. Adultery is not one of them. Stealing and lying is not one of them. So they're not commandments for Gentiles. That's not what Acts chapter 15 is talking about. It's talking about we need to have fellowship with you, so you abstain from doing these 4 things, because these we won't receive you. Because these are not doubtful disputations. These things, they're right out of the book of Leviticus. So the Torah already addresses those things in the Torah. And so these are the things that are required so we can receive you into our midst. These are not doubtful disputations. But all these other things that you're going to bring in with you, which the Torah does not specifically address, do not reject them because of these things. If they believe that this is a better day to do this or that, then do it unto the Lord. If they believe that it's okay that any day of the week you can do these things, do that unto the Lord as well. Now, the next time we gather together, we're going to continue to talk about Paul and some of the things that are put in his mouth as we get into some of the things, particularly he said in the book of Galatians. We're going to deal with the weak and beggarly elements, and we're going to deal with the allegory of Sarah and Hagar as well, because these are generally the things that are brought up to somehow be proof texts that the Torah has done away with. And it has not been done away with. It is our life and our blessings, and I submit to you that it holds the entire universe together as well. So next time, cling to your roots, that your days may be long and you will prosper in everything you set your hand to do. Shalom.